I want to bring into the conversation a great friend of the conservative movement, a wonderful Christian lady. Her name is Sandy Rios. She is the host of a great podcast called Sandy Rios 24/7. She's also director of government affairs for the American Family Association, and she has a brand new book. She's a busy person these days. The name of the book, God's Velvet Hammer: How an Ordinary Girl Was Called to Do Extraordinary Things. Sandy, good to have you with us today.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Todd. You make me happy, even when things are not happy. Thank you.
Well,
You have a
Sandy,
gift
we,
like
we
that. You
just heard
really
from,
do.
well, you're kind to say that. And we just heard from some callers pretty aggravated right now at the Republicans on Capitol Hill when it comes to the spending. But this seems to be an ongoing issue when it comes to conservatives and their relationship with the Republican Party these days.
Todd, the one thing that went through my mind, I was listening because I love history and I've been reading I love Abraham Lincoln, and I just finished another book on him, and it reminded me that during the Civil War, people have forgotten this. He had to execute a war by himself because his generals kept stabbing him in the back, ignoring his instructions. It's because of generals like McClellan that the war went on and on and on, and so many hundreds of thousands of young men died. And yet, Abraham Lincoln persevered and he finally prevailed. George Washington, same thing. Valley Forge, we haven't been through anything like that. We can be disappointed over and over again, but that means we have to dig down deep and not stop standing for what's right and fighting, just like our founders did. We can't, like, it's too hard, I'm quitting. Don't do that. Don't do that, because our we have great men who went before us to show us how to be steadfast and don't go down deep and pay the price of anxiety and worry in order to have a good outcome to save the country.
And I think that's also a good pivot into this incredible book. And I've got my copy here. It's just absolutely wonderful. It's a memoir, but it's a lot more than a memoir. I want you to explain to us, what do you mean by God's Velvet Hammer? What a great title. What do you mean by that?
Well, through my life, even when I was a little girl, I seem to always find myself in the middle of difficult situations where sometimes I've felt compelled to speak the truth, and it's not a happy thought. People don't want to hear it. And I did that when I was young. My neighbors used to call me preacher, which was not a compliment. And then I grew up and went to Washington and confronted the president and attorney generals and world leaders and and Christian leaders. It was, and never has that been fun, and never have I wanted to do that. But one time when I got into it with James Carville on Crossfire, uh, we we got into a real row, and I think after that people started calling me the Velvet Hammer, because I always spoke the truth, but I didn't do it in a destructive way. Oh, it made plenty of people mad, but I was never after people. I was after the issue.
Sandy, you actually started, and you were incredibly successful in the radio industry. I believe they're in Chicago. Take us through that process. How do you go from being a radio host in Chicago to being one of the top culture war voices in the entire country? How did that happen?
Well, I think, of course, the simple answer I have to say as a Christian, because I have to say this because it's true, I am God's velvet hammer. And I think, God just really put me in places I could never have dreamed. I could never have succeeded. I could never have plotted or planned or had a 5-year plan. And I stumbled into radio. It's actually a beautiful story. I was a singer first, and I sang for years. I was a conductor. I conducted orchestras and choruses. I wrote charts. I composed. Music was my life. But I was singing at a church one night when the a national host for Moody Broadcasting was in the audience. And long story short, he heard me talk and asked me to come in and tell my story at that time about my severely disabled daughter. So I did that, and that began a long relationship with Jim Warren, who was a drive time host. And learning, Jim was my mentor. He taught me all about radio, and I hosted with him off and on because I was still singing and traveling for 10 years. And then, of course, I ended up doing a drive time show through a series of just circumstances again that I could not have orchestrated. Not that I even ever would ask for such a thing, because you and I both know how much work it is to do 3 hours of drive time news and talk. But that's what I did, and we won awards. We had a wonderful audience, and it was Chicago's a great place to do talk radio, and I cut my teeth there, and so that's how I got into radio.
Sandy, when you look at the state of the national media these days, it's as though we really don't have a press that is striving to be fair and balanced. We have a press corps, a media that is now becoming a propaganda voice. How do we fix this? How do we get back to what the media was supposed to be in this country?
Really, Todd, I think the only solution, personally, unless there should be a tremendous deep transformation in this country, is to continue to speak the truth at all costs. At all costs. Speak it to your neighbors, your children. Don't be afraid to tell your children the truth. Don't be afraid of your children. Say the hard things. You don't have to say them over and over. You don't have to nag, but say what's true, and then say what's true, and then say what's true. And don't stop, because the truth has a power of its own. And as far as I can tell, I was in the Soviet Union just before it broke up, before Boris Yeltsin was being elected as president. And for 50 years plus, they had been told there was no God. There is no God. There is no God. And people who worshiped him had to hide, and they were punished and jailed. So many stories about that. But what I found in the interviews that I did in Moscow in 1991 was even a KGB agent, a neurologist who worked with autistic children. I'll just mention those two. They brought up to me, after they made their spiel about communism, that they were beginning to think that maybe there is a God. And each and every one of them that I interviewed, a ballerina, a professor from Moscow University, a doctor who looked like Rasputin, um, they all told me they had a grandmother who had told them about God. A grandmother, and they remembered. And so I thought, I've never forgotten that, because I thought, people never forget, even if you don't see it in your lifetime. The truth bears tremendous fruit, and it always prevails. So, I mean, Goebbels was right that if you tell a lie often enough, people believe it. That's true for a time, for a time. But after a while, it does not comport with reality, and then truth prevails.
Sandy, let's talk about moving forward here and next generation Christians as they're beginning to engage the culture. What advice would you have for those young people out there that are maybe looking at dipping their toe into the public arena and becoming a voice for some of these issues that I know you and I care so deeply about?
Well, a few things come to my mind. First of all, you cannot operate in this arena unless you, to me, personally, and be effective. You can play the game, go and play the game, but I don't really want to. I have nothing to say to those of you who want to play the game. For those of you who really have a heart for truth, and you really want to get in it because you want to do something to pull things back, to establish a plumb line, to change the culture for your children, your grandchildren, then I would just say that you, as a Christian, if you're talking about Christians, you need to really, really concentrate on your relationship with God. You need to be faithful in God's word. That is the roadmap. That is the roadmap. And honestly, you need to prepare yourself in every way. Your personal life, get things in order. Honesty, your sexuality, all of it. Get yourself together with God's help. And then just wait for God to give you an opportunity. Because my book, my whole book is about complete surprises I never saw coming, because God, a phone call came and said, by the way, would you like to be president of Concerned Women for America? A phone call came and said, would you like to do an afternoon radio show? This is out of the blue for me. Would you like to go to Russia for 2 weeks? These are calls I talk about in my book that caught me by complete surprise, because God knew that I would go anywhere and do anything for him. Now, I'm speaking as a Christian, and you asked me to address Christians. I think for those a broader audience who are just like news talk, and they have a heart for the truth, maybe respect God, but you don't necessarily know him personally. I would just say you're on the right path if you love truth, because God calls people who love truth. Those are the people he can use. And
Yeah.
people who are bold. So I think that's a long answer. Maybe there's more,
No,
but
it's a great answer, but it's a great answer, Sandy, and we are going to have to leave it there. But it is a terrific book. I'm working my way through it now, and the stories are riveting. Folks, you're going to love this one. God's Velvet Hammer, written by our great friend Sandy Rios. Get yourself a copy wherever you get your books. You'll be able to get a copy of this. There it is, the cover up on the screen, God's Velvet Hammer by Sandy Rios. Sandy, we've got to leave it there. Congratulations, and we'll definitely get you back on the show.
thank you. Thank you. You're the best. Thanks, Todd.